Welcome to Light Within. We are so excited you're here.
But before we dive in, we'd love to ask you for a quick favor. We're a brand new podcast, and your hitting subscribe would mean the world to us. So please take a moment to hit subscribe, like, comments, and help our team bring this amazing content to you every single week. Thank you. And now back to the episode.
Jeff, welcome to Light Within. It is such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So great to be here with you.
Jeff, you're what someone would call a genius. You're a biomedical engineering professor at Harvard and MIT. You published over 170 research papers. That's led to a formation of over 10 companies, 13 companies or so. But we know that getting to where you are today has not been easy for you. In fact, it might have been harder than most people have had it. So we would just love to truly get to know what it was like growing up as a kid for you.
Well, thank you so much for that question. And yes, it was quite challenging because I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. I didn't know it. My parents didn't know it. My teachers certainly didn't know it. I really felt, I'd say, like an alien, like I'd sit at the back of the class feeling completely disconnected from everyone and everything. I wasn't able to get anything. Nothing was landing, nothing. My mom tried cue cards and phonics, sounding things out. Nothing worked. And I'd look around the room and see people get it and just would sit there trying to wonder what was wrong with me. At the end of actually the second grade, the teacher pulled my parents aside and said, I'd like to hold Jeff back to repeat the second grade. My parents luckily negotiated that if I spent the summer catching up with tutors, that I could go on to the third grade. So all my classmates left for summer vacation, and here I am in summer school. And that's kind of really how it started. But something really remarkable happened that summer that changed my life in really remarkable ways. It was really my introduction to metacognition, thinking about thinking. It was something that didn't change my life kind of overnight, but actually set me on a course for being very process focused in my life and to develop all kinds of tools to survive. And then eventually I started to use those tools to thrive.
Wow, it must have been so difficult to experience that as a kid. And I definitely resonate with that because when I was a child, I also felt like an alien as well. I thought everyone else was cooler than me. I was just a quiet kid. I didn't really like studying that much, so mostly played games. This was back in Korea, where I grew up. It took a lot of kind of learnings and transformation to kind of build yourself to the person you want to be. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, just to add to that, if you think of a computer, it was almost I had this hardware, but I didn't have software that worked for me. And I needed to figure out how to program that software. I didn't know what to say in what situation. When I was asked a question, I didn't know how to respond. What I started to do was I just started to use my powers of observation more and more and more and observe what people would say in different situations, how they would act, and then I would just repeat it and quickly find out that everything is context dependent. So I started to, through very emotional experiences, because when you say something out of context, people around you typically let you know pretty quickly. And then that creates an imprint, but I started to tap into those imprints as a way to program my own software to navigate the world. What to say, who to say it to, when not to say things, when to say things, and how to act, how to kind of hold myself. And it took many years to kind of figure that out, to develop that kind of software, if you will.
Wow. How old were you when you developed that software?
I started at 7, actually. That summer between the second and the third grade, go in and meet with tutors. It was called the Gallup Learning Center. I lived in this small town called Peterborough, about an hour and a half northeast of Toronto in Canada. They would ask me questions and there would be games and it was fun. But one day in particular, they asked me a question that really changed my life. And so what happened is I went in and they read a passage as they typically did, and they asked me questions and I gave some answers, never really certain my answers were the right answers. They would sort of assure me and comfort me and things like that. But on this particular day, instead of just moving on, the tutor looked me straight in the eye after I gave my answers and asked, "How did you think about that?" And nobody had ever asked me that question before.
Mm.
And it was almost like this light bulb moment for me because I started to realize that I could think about thinking. I feel like there's so many times in my life, and I think people probably can relate to this, where you sort of see the world a certain way, but then you hear something or you see something and it just sort of changes a mindset. It just opens a possibility, like a portal into something, just a different way of thinking about or seeing the world. And that's what happened in that moment. And I started to think, wait a moment, I can think about what I say before I say it. I can think about my actions. And that was actually really difficult for me because it was completely unrefined skill. Because I now knew it was available to me, I started to focus my attention on it. And that ended up being really instrumental in developing tools for survival and then eventually to thrive, which later became the life ignition tools that are in the book that I published last year.
This person asks a very insightful question that changes your life, right? What happened after that once you realized that you can think about thinking before speaking and you're developing these new skills? What happened in the day to day after having that realization?
One thing that's kind of important to mention as well is that were a lot of sort of dark forces around me during this time. I was getting labels from teachers as lazy and lost cause. One at one point was like, why can't you be more like your sister, who was like a straight A student? And, at one point they said, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor. And they said, well, you better set your sights lower because you really just don't have what it takes to do that. I kind of became a troublemaker in certain ways. I got to know the principal and vice principals of the school pretty quickly. And then the other part of it actually that sort of made it challenging too is the teachers just didn't know what to do, and I was always stressed out, had a lot of anxiety with time when anything was timed, and we had these like math problems where you had to go through as many as you possibly could, and so they'd put a stopwatch on my desk to try to pressurize me, and they put these blinders on my desk. There was that whole kind of backdrop of what was going on. When I had this moment, this kind of window into metacognition, thinking about thinking, it started to occupy a lot of my thoughts, a lot of my attention. And I think what that did is it really helped me hone my powers of observation, which everybody has, not everyone uses to the same extent, but I think everybody can tap into it and cultivate that as a skill. And so that's what I started to do, is really look around me. And what I started to realize is almost like this analogy where I was thinking about this the other day. Let's say the goal is to get in a boat and go down the river, right? And get to the end of the river. What I'll do is, instead of sort of looking around and trying to figure out the best path, I might just get in the boat and start going. And I'm going to bump into every single rock along the way. I'll look at it and my attention will be focused on it. I'll examine it. I'll start to think about it in different ways. And then, bump into the next rock and then a twig. And by the time I get to the end, it's taken me much, much longer, but I've had a completely different experience than someone else who's taken more of a direct path. And I've made all these observations along the way and thought about them. And so this map has started to unfold in my mind, this matrix of where there's multiple points that are now populated with information, and I can kind of connect that information. And so I think that kind of an analogy of how my life started to unfold is that I really didn't know what to do or how to do it, but I just started doing things, and just observing, almost running experiments in a way. If I say this, if I do that, if I think this, don't say that, what happens? And then just taking in that information and then using it to make better decisions, as I went along. I tapped into, because I was now developing this hyper awareness, I tapped into how anytime I asked a question, I was able to hyper focus on the answer for a few moments afterward. So a teacher would be giving a class or whatever, and I'd be dozing in and out. They might say something, blah, 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 on a boat. And then all of a sudden my mind's just thinking of the boat and I'm not thinking of anything else. Everything else they're saying is gone. And I'm just in imaginary land on the boat. What I realized anytime I asked a question, information would enter my mind. It would imprint. I could recall it later. And so I realized that questions were actually a skill for me to learn, that I had to ask questions. And if I didn't ask questions, that my learning was actually not going to be very substantial. Even in college, there were some classes where the lecture halls were so big, I couldn't ask questions. And I stopped going to those lectures and found ways to kind of learn the material on my own.
Thank you so much for sharing this, because it's so helpful to see exactly what was happening in your brain as this was happening. Because when I moved from Korea, I actually didn't speak any English.
Mm.
So I did a lot of observing. I couldn't talk to anyone. I played a lot of soccer. And the way that I learned was by, observing what other people were doing and then learning from that and doing that the next time. So it's like very similar to, what you're describing. And it's so powerful to hear that this is an actual skill that's helped a lot of other people. And this is something that people can do, when moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, just something that jumps in my mind when you said that is people on the outside, they don't realize how hard you're working in your mind.
Mm,
Like they don't realize how much bandwidth you're using to make these observations. They're quick to judge that you're not working hard enough, that they're making these assumptions that you're lazy, but your brain is actually working multiplied times more than other people who are getting it. And so there's sort of like that mismatch, those judgments that start to be made and people around you because you just don't know what's going on in someone else's mind. And I think that's also something that we all need to kind of keep in mind is that people are sort of navigating the world in different ways and struggling to understand and to observe and figure out how to connect more and how to learn and how to get to a place where you're navigating things in a more seamless way. But it requires just a lot of brain power, a lot of
Mm.
effort and energy, and it can be really exhausting. I remember every day I got home, I just didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just completely wiped.
I'm curious, as you went from experiencing such learning difficulties to slowly figuring things out and creating tools for yourself, how did your mental health change over time?
Well, I think my mental health kind of early on was not great because of all these labels, because I felt like an alien, because I felt like I didn't belong, because I felt like there was something wrong with me. People were telling me there's something wrong with me. A couple things actually that helped me a lot. One is when we were in the third grade, we moved out to the country. And there was a buffalo farm across the road, a sheep farm beside us, a farmer's field in the backyard. My driveway was carved through a forest. As I walked home, I'd get off the bus because we're out in the country. And as I was walking along this driveway, all I would do is just sort of look around and into the forest, watch the leaves, move around in the trees, kind of dancing, and, various creatures roaming about and the changes that were happening from season to season. Nature was hugging me in a way as I was walking up the driveway every day, and it sort of helped to settle my mind. That was something that really I tuned into very early. And then the other I would say is that my parents were very supportive. My mom was watching very closely everything that happened. She would say that, "Oh, you have superpowers." And I'm, "Mom, what are you talking about? I can't do anything." And she would sit there with me and do my homework with me. I would become like so immobilized by the questions. I always found it super vague anytime I was asked a question. There were so many other possibilities. Maybe you've seen the movie Terminator, but like in the original Terminator, there's this one scene where the Terminator's in a room and there's like the landlord or something's knocking on the door and saying like, "What are you doing? Get out." And the Terminator's screen pops up and there's like 5 or 6 things that he could say. And then he picks one. I kind of felt like that when I was younger. Anytime I was asked a question, there were many possibilities. It was so vague, and I couldn't figure out what's the answer the teacher wants. What's the highest probability? That to me was very immobilizing. And so my mom would help me interpret what the teacher wanted and sort of sit with me and help do the assignments. And the other thing actually that was really profound for me, and I think one of the things that actually saved me along the way is that in the fourth grade or so at my school, we started to have speech competitions. My mom actually wrote speeches for me and then coached me how to say them. And I was terrible at memorizing, but she would say, like, "Okay, if you can memorize one word, just one word." And so I, could do a word. And then she's, "Well, if you can do one word, you can do two. And then if you can do two, you can do a sentence. If you can do a sentence, a paragraph." She really was patient. I ended up becoming the kid to beat in these speech competitions. We all need just one thing, and it doesn't matter what it is, one thing where we're sort of putting in effort, we're directing it to some degree on our own, and we're sort of able to see progress, self-directed progress. my mom was coaching me, but I was adapting. I was putting in the effort to memorize and to learn from the coaching. And then I would get up and I would actually do well in these competitions. Because I feel like when you start focusing your attention on anything, then you start to unfold this matrix in your mind and start connecting it to other things. I was like, wait a moment, if I can do speech competitions, maybe I could be good at presenting in class on projects, and maybe I could do this, and maybe I could do that. And so that's what really helped my mental health. But along the way, I would say today, actually, it's really great, but because it's not been really great along the way, and I've had a lot of experiences, and I'm happy to talk about those as well, if you'd like. Yeah.
I feel like it's so powerful turning one important learning and taking that to different aspects of your life and gaining confidence and skills along the way to kind of become who you want it to be. That's really, really powerful.
We all have this incredible biology that's working for us, like our powers of observation, our senses, our prefrontal cortex in our brain, which is ginormous compared to most of the other animals out there. We have this ability to emotionally regulate and think about thinking and to cultivate resilience in community, and it's all at our disposal. And I think that society kind of puts us in these boxes and kind of tells us like resilience is up to the individual, this way of being in sort of current society that I think it narrows how we think about our potential and our capabilities. We all have incredible resources that we have within us to do amazing things, and we just need little tools and rituals and practices to engage that.
I know that what you're describing is attainable for anyone, no matter what age they are. And you made it so simple by writing a book, this new concept of life ignition tools. Would you be able to share more about your book and any high level summary of that?
Absolutely. The life ignition tools are 12 tools. They're really all about intercepting patterns, algorithms, habits to actively think and decide versus just jumping in with habitual responses. In life, there's opportunity to be intentional in every moment. But yet, there's $1 trillion in marketing and advertising spent every year to hijack our attention, to tell us, what to buy, how to act, what experiences we should be having. I think we become susceptible to the messaging and the algorithms, and we end up leading these algorithmic lives. We tend to be kind of like almost robots, and others are sort of pulling the strings. But yet, we have the ability to be intentional in any moment. And one of the ways we do that, in my experience, is we just have to have simple rituals and practices and just things we do to intercept the algorithms. And so that's what LIT is really all about, or just tools to be able to intercept and be, wait a moment, is this really serving me? Is this really my intention? Is this what I would truly choose? If I pause in my life and think deeply about it, is this my choice or is this somebody else's choice? And so to develop that awareness and then to start making the decisions that really are connected with your core wisdom and your value system and what you really deem as important in your life. And so that's what LIT is a series of on-ramps to help people to navigate their lives with more intention.
This sounds incredible because even for me, before I started practicing mindfulness, that I was on autopilot and I was not thinking before speaking, just turning into my impulses. So the first thing that came to mind, I would do. And after practicing mindfulness, I was able to have that pause to really be intentional about my actions, my words, and that just became so freeing. It felt like I was alive or like free again. Seems like the tools that you're mentioning right now does a similar effect. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a reconnection, a resensitization of our aliveness. I think when we're born, when we're children, we just tend to look at everything with awe. We tap into our curiosity. It's just, we don't even have to think about it. It just happens, right? And then I think, then we get subjected to this education system, which really contracts our minds. The way that the world works, it sort of takes us away from being able to lead with our curiosity. We start to believe that learning only happens in the classroom. And yet we're wired to learn, like we're born to learn and born to be, our brains to be lit up by everything around us, really. To me, that's a really big part of this is how can we resensitize our aliveness? How can we get in touch with each of our senses and heighten our senses so we can deepen our everyday experiences, so we can actually go back into our backyard and experience awe through these practices and rituals? At the point now where I can literally experience awe in any moment. Everybody can do that. Like, everybody has access to that. When you see a raindrop going down the window and just being in awe of that, or looking up at the clouds or the night sky, or, you know, burning some incense and just watching the smoke pattern, it's accessible to everybody to be able to do that. And there's just some steps that you need to take in order to, you know, move along that path.
You know, awe is actually my favorite emotion to experience. Why is awe such a healing force, in your opinion?
My sense is that it's wired into us. The same idea of why, when we go out into nature, anybody goes out into nature, their heart rate goes down, their blood pressure goes down, their sense of wellness goes up. I think it's just part of our wiring, our code, the ability to access that and to navigate the world and be able to experience awe. And I think that what's happened is that over time, humans have separated themselves from the rest of the natural world, and we've tend to exist in a space that's dominated by human constructs, you know, constructs of the human mind. Just all technology, really, you know, or a lot of technology is, you know, most of it is like that. You could still experience awe in those situations, but then what happens is you start to miss your skill of being able to notice nuances in the natural world. Let's say all of us here, right at this moment, we look around the room where we're in right now and we say, okay, what's changing? What's really changing in our room right now, right? Like, is the paint changing much, right? Like, everything is changing, but can we notice changes? Not really. Now you go outside and you say, okay, what's changing? The leaves are moving around, you know, the flowers are blooming, the plants are angling towards the sun and they're moving throughout the day. Like, everything is changing. It's complete dynamic. We're wired to tune into those nuances. And now we put ourselves in these, you know, human constructs, these homes, apartments, you know, cars, wherever it is, and nothing is really changing around us. And so we're actually dulling our natural abilities to notice nuances, to embrace awe, these things that are wired in to make us feel great, to make us kind of reinforce the deepened experiences that we can have and the connection that we can have with the world around us. But then, because we've been creating constructs just solely based on principles of the human mind, we're lessening our ability to have deep experiences and to engage awe. But I'm here to say we can get that back. It's just practices and rituals and really simple, accessible steps that we can take to do that. And I'm happy to share with you some of the ones that I've been practicing to get there.
Yeah, I'm just imagining how different this world and most of our lives could be if we just simply noticed those small things and experience the beauty and the joy in our everyday life. Instead of looking for something else, what if we just enjoyed the things that were around us just by observing more and being more intentional about where we focus? That's really, really powerful.
I agree. And, you know, I would say the one step even beyond that is to share with others. You know, that could be also a good use of social media, perhaps, right? Like, if you experience awe somewhere around you, to share it with others and sort of like inspire others to experience awe in the world around them, right? Because I just think that has a lot of positivity, because when we experience awe, we have all these positive neurotransmitters in our brain that just get pumped out, and it just makes us feel great, right? And it also, that not only makes us feel great, it makes the other people around us feel great. You're more humble, you're more gracious, you know, you can express gratitude more, like, you know, all these things just kind of create like a ripple effect. And so I personally have gotten to this point where I feel like a moral, ethical obligation to do whatever I can to notice the nuances, to experience awe, to engage in self-care where I'm getting the right amount of sleep and eating well and all these things and exercising, because I've experienced over and over and over again, when I do that, I can bring energy and transmit energy to other people, and other people will resonate with my energy, like kind of raise the level of sort of positivity in the room just by focusing on myself and embracing in these types of practices and rituals. It's reinforcing that I'm on the right track. When we're open to the cues, we get these cues from our minds, our bodies, our interactions from other people. When we kind of experiment with things in our lives, like for example, in the winter, I like to do indoor cycling kind of on a stationary bike. Every day that I do it, it's like for hours afterwards, I'm in a wonderful mood, and the people around me notice, and I feel like my connections with them and, my mood is heightened, that's accessible to everybody, at any time. I've kind of gotten to the point where I see it as a personal obligation that for my role in this world, that I need to take care of myself like that so I can bring the most positive energy forth and hopefully impact others that are in my presence by doing that, because I've seen it. That's actually what happens.
For the people who are listening, who are now realizing that they're on autopilot and that they need to experience a lot more awe and seek that out, what's a small step that they can take today to be able to do so?
There are lots of possibilities. And I think that it's so easy to be prescriptive to say, okay, do this and it'll work. But the truth is that not everything works for everybody at a particular time. Certain tools might work for me today, but then a few weeks from today, it may not work. So the key is to sort of have a number of possibilities to embrace. And often you want to do things that are really simple. Sometimes, like if you hear like, oh, if you just do this for 6 weeks, then something will change. And that can actually work for some people. I'm not one of those people who really likes to practice something for 6 weeks to sort of notice a change. Like I definitely can do that, and I have done that in the past, but I gravitate more towards simple things. One thing is doing new, infusing fresh energy into your life, changing something up. And, we hear these things like others speak of like, changing the hand that you brush your teeth with, for example. One of the reasons I like it is because when I do it, I tune into like, wait a moment, I'm not very good at this. I don't think my teeth are really that clean after this. But then what I notice is if I just do it like 2 or 3 or 4 times, all of a sudden I start to get a little better at it. It's not just switching your hand with the toothbrush. It's actually just persisting long enough so you start to notice that you're actually improving. And that can be really energizing. And that's an algorithm, right? Like you reach for a toothbrush and just brush it with this hand, but you could actually use the other hand. In the moment, we might feel like, but that hand's not trained and it would never work, but it actually, you can develop that skill so it works. Whenever you change something, it's like your brain recognizes, oh, you changed something, what else could you change, right? And you start looking around for other things that you can change, like what I drink in the morning. I used to go to coffee shops all the time. And again, I was like, wait a moment, I'm going to coffee shops. I'm opening my computer. I'm sitting there for a couple hours. I'm like, I have coffee at home and we have 2 dogs that are sitting at home waiting for me to come back. Why wouldn't I just stay at home, make my own coffee, and have the dogs right beside me? And so when I started to think, okay, what's my intention here? I love being with the dogs. I love connecting with them. So my intention is to connect with them. I'd like to have some beverage in the morning that I'm kind of sipping because I just enjoy that, but I don't need to be in a coffee shop. And by the way, every time I go, I'm getting like a paper cup that's lined with plastic that you can't recycle. So, it's sort of like, wait, what am I doing here? Another thing that I do is when I have my breakfast, I have this sort of breakfast bowl that I make, and I stand in front of the window in my kitchen and I try to think about what I'm looking at actually made what was in this bowl, right? Like it came from the earth. And I try to think about the cyclical nature of it. This is going in me and then it's going to come out of me. And I start to now have a deeper appreciation for the world around me because I'm looking at what's creating the food that I'm about to consume. There's so many things that we can intercept. And when you start doing it, you start infusing fresh energy into your life and you start opening up to noticing the nuances and being more intentional with everything.
How often are you switching things up?
I don't have any sort of routine that I do every single day the same. Instead of trying to do, let's say, wake up and do 10 minutes of meditation, what if I just try to make my whole life meditative? What if I try to have moments throughout my day where I'm just sort of engaging and embracing in these meditative things? What I recognize is that when we engage in something and we focus our attention on it, it will naturally evolve because we'll start to make connections with other things. I'll give you another example. A good friend of mine, a couple of years ago, I was at his house for dinner, and there were like 4 or 5 of us there. And he said, "Okay, guys, I'm practicing gratitude and let's all try this together." We had our dinner and he said, "Okay, we're going to put our hands over the food and we're going to think about the flavor of each ingredient before we eat." The amazing thing is, like, after I practiced that a number of times, I got better at it. And then he said, "Okay, we're going to think about the energy from the sun and the power of photosynthesis and the farmer's hands, all the energy that went into getting this food to our plate and the transporters and the people who prepared it." And then he said, "Okay, and now this food is going to become us." Then we ate it. And I was like, wow, this is really, really incredible. So I started practicing that 3 times a day for every meal. And it takes like a minute, right, to do it. So you're not really adding any time. Then I started kind of reading, and there's podcasts and there's things that are kind of crossing my desk all the time. And so I started thinking, like, the molecules in the food here existed forever and have been through so many different cycles of life, right? Like this regenerative cycles. And so now I'm looking at the food and I'm sort of thinking of like the history of the universe, and these things just start to evolve when you focus your attention on it. That's just how humans are wired. The more we can sort of focus our attention on something, the more connections we can make to it in our day, the more that matrix of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, insights unfolds. And then these rituals and practices just naturally evolve.
How did you balance such profound daily rituals with productivity? And for listeners who think they just don't have time for this, what will be your answer?
Well, I think that from my experience, there's productivity and then there's value creation. They're linked, but it's important to think of them separately as well as together. But when you think of them separately, what we find is that there's certain things we work on where we're creating a lot of value, and there's certain things we spend a lot of time on where we're actually not really moving the needle much on anything. To me, engaging in these practices has been incredibly helpful for me to focus on value creation. So really maximizing how much I'm moving the needle for the work that I'm doing, because there's a lot of decisions that we make in terms of how we work and where to focus our energy and prioritization, and how do we figure out what's the North Star of really what we're aiming for. There could be a North Star for our life at that moment or a North Star for that project. And being able to tune into that can help us make decisions about where to focus our energy so that we're maximizing value creation, that we're actually maximizing meaningful contributions, right, to our families, to our work environments, to our communities, to society, these kinds of things. So to me, the rituals and practices that I embrace, it's not even a 10-minute meditation. These are really, really sort of simple, accessible practices that I think they don't interfere with things because they don't take that much time. I have engaged in transcendental meditation, for example, where, in the morning I would do 20 minutes and at night 20 minutes or maybe 30, and did that for a while. But I felt some resistance to do that. It was really helpful for me to do that for a series of months. But then I feel like sometimes the practice gets in the way of what the original intention was. For example, like I take the dogs for a walk and I'm trying to connect with the dogs. I'm trying to connect with the world around me. So one of the things I started to do was cycle through my senses. And as I'm walking them around, I'm saying like sight, and I'm looking at the texture of the bark on the trees, and I'm looking at the leaves moving in the wind and the tops of the trees, like the shapes. And then I say sound, and I'm listening for the birds and the rustling of the wind in the leaves. And then I say touch, and I feel the clothes on my skin, and I feel my heels hit the ground. What happens is that now when I walk around my neighborhood and I see like a tree or, I focus on it. I see the patterns. Like it looks like it's dancing to me, like if you look at the patterns of the bark, like it's just really, really interesting. Again, these are just like really simple, accessible things that don't take time. They're things that you can do that can heighten your experiences and heighten how you can tap into your senses and experience the world.
I love how something so simple that doesn't take that much time can really transform, your life, your experiences, and the new possibilities that it really brings. I want to talk more about, becoming an active opportunist. How you can like train your brain to seek diverse experiences and seize opportunities. Could you talk a bit more about that?
I like to think about opportunities almost like if you visualize yourself and there's all these dots around you, 360, right? All these dots always around you, almost like infinite number of dots. And I kind of look at it as those are the opportunities that are truly there. There's like limitless possibilities of what we could do in any moment or opportunities that we could engage. And yet what happens is that often because of the way that we've kind of trained our senses, we tend to only see one possibility. So to me, being an active opportunist is sort of recognizing that there are limitless possibilities in any situation of things that we could engage. One example might be, let's say you're in a particular workplace, you have a colleague and you tend to have conversations about X, like about something related to the work. You've never asked them, what are your hobbies? Or what are the things that you used to be your hobbies that aren't your hobbies anymore, right? What are the things that you used to do that really lit you on fire, that you're really passionate about? Skiing or playing board games or doing art or music or whatever it was, right? You go off track of just having a work conversation and you ask that type of question, right? Like, what are the things that used to really light you up that you're not doing anymore? And then they say, oh, well, I used to do X, I used to do Y. And maybe one of those things is something you've always wanted to do. So you say, hey, I've always wanted to do that. And then the next thing you know, you're like, wait, well, why don't we this weekend, we can go do that. All of a sudden, you found a way to engage like serendipity, to pull out of nothing this opportunity to connect and to do something completely new. That exists everywhere, those possibilities, just creating the conditions to be able to see the opportunities that are truly right in front of us. Another example, you're someone and you want to start a company in a particular area, and you're like, oh, I don't know, I need people who can do this and who can do that, and how am I going to find them? But chances are your friend network and your family, that people there already have some of those skills, or they know people who have those skills. Again, it's like embracing that opportunity is right there. It's waiting for you to access it, but you just have to take that first step of then sort of asking people around you, hey, do you know anybody who has this? Start reach out to your friends and family and find it. And next thing you know, you have all the skills that you need are right there. It's so easy for us to be in the situation where we're just living that one possibility and we see ourselves in a box and we feel trapped. It's so hard to engage these other opportunities, but it really isn't that hard. I'll give you one example of something that happened that was really transformational in my life. When my daughter was born in 2009, I was actually having a really hard time getting grants for my lab. So about the first 100 grants that I wrote, almost every single one rejected, 93, 94 grants, and really felt like I was getting punched in the face every time. And I only had 3 years of startup money, and then I would be out. In 2009, my daughter's born, and I was invited. It was this like small, tiny grant, and I was invited to give a presentation. I made it to kind of like the final round of this grant. And I gave a presentation, and I was kind of falling asleep during the presentation. Like, it was really kind of brutal. But at the end, somebody there said, hey, I'd like to go for coffee with you and just chat about whatever. I was like, wait a moment. Okay, I'm failing at getting grants. I'm like sleeping in my office to get grants submitted. Why would I go for coffee with somebody? I have no idea where it's going to lead. I need to focus on the grants. But something just felt like maybe there's an opportunity there. So I said, sure. So I go and I meet with him. And during the conversation, he's like, I want to introduce you to Kathy Call at Sanofi, this pharma company. And I was kind of thinking, oh my God, okay, so here's a conversation. It was nice. I really enjoyed it. But now I have to meet somebody else. Okay, that's going to take time, and I have to get back to the grants. And I was like, but there might be this opportunity. So I went and I met with Kathy. And I go and meet with her, and she's like, actually, I want you to meet with Sridhar. He's out of town, and when he comes back, you should meet with him. And by that time, where's this really going? It feels like I might be going in circles. But again, I kind of felt like maybe there was something there. So I went and met with Sridhar, and we totally hit it off, and he started inviting me to give all these lectures. So I started giving lectures in Paris, in San Diego, in Boston to executives in the company. And then he said, hey, why don't you pitch some ideas to us, some projects we could work on together? So I pitched 2 projects. They funded one of the projects. That led to $2 million to my lab. And during that time, I met a number of people in Sanofi, two entrepreneurs in particular, I then ended up starting companies with. So this one coffee interaction, taking advantage of being an active opportunist, led to significant funding for my lab and two startup companies. To me, that's kind of being an active opportunist, is sort of knowing based on previous experiences that these possibilities exist all around us and that we tend to look at things along a linear path. But most of the things that happen in life are serendipitous, and you can actually design for serendipity in your life by just engaging in things that you don't know where it's going to go.
Well, as you start to develop your skill more of understanding and noticing more and more opportunities, how do you recognize the right opportunities versus distractions?
Yeah, we need time for information and experiences to sink in and for our brains to sync up, right? So that's the problem. If you do back to back to back sort of meetings, then you actually don't have time for the information and the insights to percolate in your brain and then find the right settling spot, where it can connect with everything else that you know. And so I've made that a huge priority in my life to press pause, in between meetings where I'm not doing anything. I go for a walk or just close my eyes just for 5 minutes or something, even, 10 minutes. When I do that, I start to realize that every interaction I have, there's something to be learned, but then there's also intuition to be tapped into where I will start to realize, okay, this sort of interaction is declining in its potential to be meaningful or useful. I start to get these cues as to where to go and where to slow down or stop going, in those directions. And so to me, it's just tuning into that. But at the same time, recognizing that every situation, everybody I meet with, there's something to be learned. There's something to be gained. Somebody's going to say something and it's going to provide some sort of data point or information or insight that's going to enhance my ability to flip a mindset or to contemplate something or to understand something. There's insights to be gained from everybody. But then sometimes if you start, let's say spending more and more time with person X, you might start to feel, oh, this is taking me off course. Like you start to tune into that. I don't know if I would call that a distraction per se, because that could actually help reinforce that this is the way you want to go, right? So that could be like a helpful thing.
As you were sharing about your grants getting rejected left and right, definitely reminded me of our experience of getting rejected by at least 100 investors, probably like 200 to 300. And as you said, kind of randomly, opportunistically, a few investors that were the right fit kind of showing up at the last minute. Or I really wouldn't have existed without that. I'm sure this is a really common experience for people where you just keep trying and trying, but it just doesn't work out. And I'm curious, how did you have that hope and what was driving you to keep going at that moment?
So anytime I get a grant rejection, it would feel like I was being punched in the face, really visceral negativity, right? And I would look at the grant reviews and I'd just be like, oh, they didn't read it. They didn't understand it. Then what would happen is I realized, and again, to me, this is sort of like the power of observation that we all have, which is just super beautiful and exciting. I started to notice that anytime I had a rejection, there'd be this emotional pendulum would just swing out to the side, negativity, full body mind negativity, kind of sunk, just like, oh. And that's all I could think of and feel like that's my whole life. Like that defines me, that like you can't see past that. But then what I would notice is that a day or two later, after I got a good night's sleep, that pendulum starts to come back. And I'm like, wait a moment, I'm not as angry anymore. But yet I'm still dealing with the same situation. I'm not feeling it viscerally throughout my whole body and my mind. And now I kind of feel like my mind is a bit more open. And then I'd go back and look at what the reviewers said, and I'd start to realize that they were actually schooling me in how to write a better grant, right? Now, some of them said things that didn't make sense to me or that I still was like, oh, they didn't read the grant. But a lot of the feedback was actually useful. And so I started to engage in this process of where because now I know the rhythm of my emotional pendulum swing, right? That I can't look at the reviewer's comments until a few days after when the emotions subside. And then that's like an after the rain moment where I can gain some insights. And when I focus my attention on it, it started to populate in my mind a new approach for approaching grant writing. And to the point where now when I write grants, I can see 10 people sitting around the table and I'm writing the grant and I know every negative thing they're going to say about it at every sentence. And so now I can actually prepare much better grants and my success rate went way up because I was able to engage in this process. And so to me, that's kind of a way of persisting, is sort of focusing beyond failure, focusing on the insights that you're going to gain, and also recognizing the rhythms of the mind and the body and the emotions in various situations, and realizing that pendulum always comes back, and that there might be moments that you can sit with what just happened and actually learn, and there might be moments where you need to go do something else because the emotion's so strong, your mind isn't open yet to receive. I think one of the key things to me is that failure, it's the ticket to the greatest receptivity that I've ever experienced. After a moment of failure, not the moment after, but again, a few days after, once the emotions subside, that my brain is more porous, it's more available, it's open to thinking differently and receiving new information than it was at any other point in the process. It's really a beautiful time for your mind and yourself to grow because you're receptive to new possibilities.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it just brought back memories of how much anger I felt with those rejections. And, I'm sure people could have experienced that with, job searching and whatever else. But when you allow those experiences to be a teacher instead of enemy, you really get to learn and take yourself to the next level.
Yeah, and like tuning into your own personal rhythms of your own existence. Certain times I feel like I can be present, and other times I'm less present. Being intentional about what you're doing in both of those times, right? And recognizing that you're going to flip between those times. You find ways to access intention in a more profound way because now you know that moment right after might not be the best moment to do X, Y, or Z. Might be a good moment to just to do something else, to engage in an
Mm.
activity that just kind of lets your emotions come back.
I'm really curious, as you redefined, the word failure for you, how has your definition of success changed?
I don't know. I tend not to think about success. For example, the dinosaurs roamed the earth for 65, 75 million years or something and then went extinct. Would you say the dinosaurs were successful or were a failure? Even the word failure, like I use it, but I question when I use it. Rather than think of something as success or failure, I try to think of it as meaningful contributions. I try to think of intention and evolution. And, when we connect with another person or a creature or the world around us, all of us just get lit up, right? It leads to all these positive neurotransmitters. And so to me, redefining success with other words, with more of a feeling, feelings where we have more sustained, higher baseline in how we feel about the world and how we feel about ourselves and the work that we're doing. Success seems like this thing that is just a construct in our minds. I haven't been able to relate to it in a way that's made a lot of sense to me.
Jeff, I love how you're removing every construct that life has taught us and
Yeah,
making it into your own world. It's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
And you one way to do that is being so curious about the world, right? In your book, you describe curiosity as a fuel source. How can people tap into their curiosity more?
I think there's a lot of ways to do that. One way is to curate friends who are super curious and just hang around with them. Someone said to me yesterday, I had this amazing conversation with a professor of education at Northeastern University, and they said, community is the curriculum. If you want to become more curious, then submerge yourself in a community of curious people, right? And then that's your curriculum to become more curious. Another way that's worked really well for me is through asking questions. And I had this experience in grad school when I got there where I would go to these seminars. I would sit there kind of dozing in and out, but then at the end there was the question and answer period. And it was like the arrows were flying. Like people were asking the best questions I'd ever heard and just cutting right through the speaker or whatever they were, had just presented on. And I was thinking to myself, like, wow, these are amazing questions, but why are they not coming to me? Like, what's wrong with me? What I did was, because I was so process focused, and I kind of, again, through tuning into my own rhythms and being and trying to, figure out how does my mind work. And what I realized is that pattern recognition was really key for me. What I did is the next seminar I went to, everyone was focused on what the speaker was saying, but I was focused on something completely different. I was focused on the questions people were asking at the end of the seminar, and I wrote them all down. And then I went to the next seminar and I wrote down all the questions, and the next one, the next one, the next one. And eventually I had pages of questions. And so I paused after a few months and just started flipping through, and, took a few days, and then all of a sudden, bingo. I recognized that the questions that people were asking actually could fit into 4 or 5 categories. Was the experiment set up properly? Was it working? A whole bunch of questions. Did they have the right controls? Are the results important? Did the speaker overstate their conclusions? So there were like these categories. And once I understood the rationale behind the questions, then all of a sudden those questions became my questions. Because when I went to seminars, I now was, do they have the right controls for the experiment working? Are they overstating their conclusions? Does the data support what they're saying? Are the results actually important? When I started to clue into that, it stoked my curiosity. I was actually now super interested in what the speaker was saying. I was able to pay more attention to what they're saying. And then not only that, I was connecting what they were saying with other things I knew. I was coming up with ideas of what they could do next. Through questions, I was able to tap into my curiosity. That's something I think everybody can do, is go through your day, right? Just as a practice, and say to yourself, okay, I'm going to listen to the questions that people ask others or ask me. And I'm going to write just one question down that I don't typically ask or that I think is a great question. And later today or tomorrow, I'm going to try to ask that question. And when you do that, you tap into your curiosity because you've already identified a question that you're curious about. You can do this in social settings as well. People in a crowd who are really good at connecting with other people. So it's like, okay, what questions do they ask? They tend to ask questions about things that they're deeply curious about, because when you ask somebody something out of genuine curiosity, you connect more with that person. To me, questions are a tool that we can use to access curiosity. I want to emphasize it's not the single question, it's the evolution of questions. Like I might ask you a question I like to ask. I'd like to understand, like, how did you decide to come to the US? What were the other possibilities? And what was the advice that you were getting at the time? Were there people advising you not to come? I'm curious about that. I'm asking you out of genuine curiosity those questions, and then you give answers, and I'm listening, and now I'm going to come up with other questions that'll deepen the connection and my ability to hone in on my curiosity. And then we can access that, and that can, heighten our just baseline level of curiosity in our life.
How can people get better at asking great questions?
By just tuning into the questions that other people ask. What are the questions that you're really excited about that you're not asking that you see other people asking? When you try those questions on, that's how you start to activate your mind to then start asking other questions. We have this potential in our brain. Our brains are just waiting for it to be activated. And you can tap into it by starting to ask other questions. I did this questioning workshop a few months ago where there was a group of like pharma executives, and I sort of walked them through, sort of gave an introduction, and then I said, okay, go and meet somebody you haven't met before, ask some questions to get to know each other. But as you're asking questions of each other, write down the questions that other people ask you that are not your questions, but that you like. And then at the end, we went around and people shared the questions, right? Like, what are the questions that people ask? So there's one where someone said, what is a job you could have chosen? You're here now, but along your career path, what's something else that you were considering? If you don't ask the question, you would never know. But to me, it's like super interesting, right? Like someone was considering this path, but they went along this path. They open things up because now they give you other possibilities of asking people when you start to get to know people. It leads to deeper connections when you're curious. So it's like finding ways to just ask new questions and then tune into the responses, and you'll just activate. Like, we're programmed to learn, we're programmed to ask, we're programmed to be curious, so you're just tapping into this like life force energy that's already there.
You must have a bank of questions lying around. Do you have a favorite question that you like?
Earlier in my life, I would ask certain questions to people, but now I go more with the flow, and I try to be in the moment. Like, for example, before I go to conferences or meetings, I set the intention to connect, right? Like I say, my intention is to connect with people at this venue. That simple act of just doing that changes everything for me. And then when I do that, I'm more attentive to what people are saying. I'm then able to tap into my curiosity more and ask. So the questions just flow when I do that. Just set the intention to connect. And that allows me to access questions that are tied deeply to my curiosity.
I know you have such a profound view of this world, and I know you have a view on interconnectedness. I'd love for you to share anything you'd like to share on that topic.
At this point, it's hard for me not to see the connections. I don't think I was always in this place, but when you start to look around and sort of notice that there's systems upon systems upon systems, and everything is relying on everything else. One of the most profound sort of experiences I've had in interconnectivity is when I go to the jungle in Panama, which I'm actually going on Sunday, when I'm sort of deep in the jungle and just kind of looking around and seeing and really feeling into it, and sort of noticing how creatures are dependent on the shade of the trees, and the trees are trying to get to the sun, and some trees can't get there because other trees are ahead of it, right? So it has to wait for it to fall down in order for it to go up. And it's just sort of like everything relies on everything else when you start to look around. And I think that, to me, it's actually a big problem that we don't typically feel that interconnectedness in today's world, because we've isolated ourselves from nature. Like, we're so far removed from the interconnectedness of everything. It's a problem because then we don't have gratitude for the dynamic equilibrium. And we start to sort of look at the earth as a resource for humans to access, but rather we don't see ourselves as a nature working. Everything in nature is working for everything else, everything. And so when we start to take on this mindset that we're separate from nature, this human centricity, this human supremacy kind of mindset that not any one person is responsible for, but that's kind of where we're at. All of the things we have right now have thrown off ecosystems. We don't show gratitude for that because it's not in the front of our minds, like seeing the interconnectedness of everything. So I feel like when you see that, and that's like a lot of indigenous ways of knowing and being, is about embracing that interconnectedness. It just becomes part of who you are. And when you start to feel that, when you start to experience it, you start to appreciate things around you, start to take better care of everything. You start to take better care of each other, and you start to be more intentional about how you access resources and how you repay, the nature for all the gifts that we've been able to take.
Thank you so much for, first of all, just being so vulnerable with your stories. And one thing that really stuck out this conversation was this obligation to do all the things that you mentioned, so that I can also be better for others. As you said, that positive energy and a new way of looking at the world is so contagious. That impact you can make on others could be so profound as well. So
There's so many ways to exert intention in our lives, and sometimes it feels like it's a high bar, like, oh, I have to do like 10 or 20 minutes of meditation or breath work or whatever it is to tap into it. Mindfulness is something, like, if you look at indigenous ways of knowing and being and hunters and gatherers, mindfulness is something that we have, that we are, that we can access. And it's not necessarily something you go get. It's actually something that we already have and that we can tap into. All you need to do is look for just one tiny way to be intentional in your day. It could be as simple as not putting the sugar in your coffee that one day, like just something to disrupt a pattern, or taking a different route to work. When you feel like interrupting someone, just pausing and just letting it pass, even as important as it is, just letting it pass just once in your day, right? Or asking someone a different question, like asking somebody something that you didn't ask before, or asking someone about, oh, what were the hobbies that you used to do when you were in college or high school that lit you up that you're not doing now. Just one little thing in your day, these things can create a domino effect and put you on like a really incredible path towards self-efficacy and liberation and being able to experience awe in your backyard every day.
And I feel like that's what it means to find the light within yourself. Mindfulness is already there, curiosity is already there, your energy is already there. You just need to be present with it and access it.
Tap into the light within, right?
I love it. I love it.
Jeff, where can people go to learn more about your book and yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that. My website is just my name, jeffkarp.com, Karp with a K. There's a newsletter that I put out once or twice a month. And then there's information about the book and my laboratory and different practices and rituals and things that I've been engaging. You can find that all there.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on Light Within. You've shared such incredible wisdom, and I'm so excited to share this with everyone.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Thank you for this great conversation and, all the wonderful questions and for the opportunity to engage like this. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching. Hope that resonated with you.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts and comments.
Your support means the world to us and helps us bring these conversations to you for free. We read every single comment and we would love to connect with you there. So go subscribe. Until next time, love yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, your light is always within you.